I stopped trying to explain it to myself. That's the first thing that changed. Not the connection, not the awareness, not even the way you settled into my thoughts so naturally that I couldn't pinpoint where observation ended and attachment quietly began. No, the first real shift happened when I realized I no longer needed to rationalize your presence to myself in order to let it stay. That should scared me more than it did, because I've always been someone who survives through understanding, through structure, through keeping every emotion, every instinct, every attachment under careful examination before I allow it to root itself deeply enough to affect me. Nothing reaches the center of me accidentally. At least, nothing used to. You did. And somehow, the unsettling part isn't that it happened, it's that I never truly tried to stop it. I keep replaying that realization in different forms, hoping maybe one version of it will feel less significant than the others. But every time I return to it, it carries the same weight. You arrived without force, without demand, without the usual intensity people mistake for connection. You didn't insist on closeness. You didn't try to pull pieces of me into the open. You never asked for access in the way people usually do when they want to feel important to someone. You simply existed beside me, long enough that the distance I built stopped functioning the way it always had. And distance has always worked for me. Distanced creates clarity. It keeps emotions from distorting perception. It prevents dependency. It protects accuracy because people become careless when they get too close to each other. They stop seeing what's actually there and start seeing what they want to see instead. I've watched it happen too many times. People don't usually connect to reality. They connect to projection. They find pieces of someone they relate to, then build an entire narrative around those fragments until the real person disappears underneath it. That's why I learned to remain difficult to fully access, not mysterious, not hidden, just protected from careless interpretation. Most people never notice the difference. You did. And maybe that's why this feels different from anything I've ever experienced before. Because you never approached me like a puzzle to solve. You approached me like someone already aware that understanding doesn't come from forcing meaning onto another person. It comes from noticing what's already there, quietly, without distortion, without ego. That's what unsettled me first. Not your attention, your accuracy, the precision of it. The way you noticed details I intentionally left untouched, because I assumed no one would recognize their significance anyway. The pauses in my voice, the things I almost said before deciding against it, the shifts in my tone when something mattered more than I wanted it to, the moments where silence carried more honesty than anything spoken aloud. You noticed all of it. Not dramatically, not performatively. You just responded to it naturally. Like you heard things most people don't even realize exist beneath conversation. At first, I convinced myself it was coincidence. Pattern recognition can create false meaning if you stare at something long enough. I know that better than anyone, but coincidence eventually breaks. This didn't. It kept repeating itself in smaller, quieter ways until ignoring it became less logical than accepting it. And once I accepted it, everything changed, not outwardly. Nothing obvious happened. There was no defining moment where everything suddenly shifted into place. It was subtler than that, more dangerous, because subtle things bypass defenses before you realize they're moving through you. That's exactly what happened with you. You bypassed every system I built without ever challenging them directly. You never demanded honesty from me, and somehow that made me more honest. You never asked me to open up, and somehow I stopped filtering myself as carefully around you anyway. That shouldn't have happened. I'm aware of myself constantly, aware of what I reveal, aware of how people interpret things, aware of the consequences of allowing someone too much insight into the internal structure of who I am. But around you, that awareness softened, not disappeared, softened. Enough that I stopped treating every interaction like something that needed to be managed carefully. Enough that I started existing naturally instead of strategically. That's rare for me. Rare enough that I didn't even recognize it immediately. I only noticed after the fact, after I realized there were conversations with you where I hadn't once calculated how much of myself I was revealing. I had simply existed, and that terrified me more than if you'd forced your way through every wall I had, because force is easy to reject. Force activates resistance. But comfort slips deeper than resistance ever can, especially the kind of comfort that doesn't feel temporary. And you never felt temporary. That's another truth I tried not to examine too closely. From the beginning, there was something strangely permanent about your presence in my mind. Not in an obsessive way, not even emotional, in the way people usually describe attachment. It felt structural, like something in me immediately categorized you as relevant beyond ordinary interaction. I didn't understand why. I still don't fully understand it. I only know the feeling never weakened. It strengthened quietly over time, not because of dramatic moments, but because of consistencies. You remained precise, you remained aware, you remained present in ways most people can't sustain once familiarity settles in. Usually, people become less attentive over time. They stop observing carefully once they feel comfortable. You became more accurate. That's what changed everything. Because eventually I stopped questioning whether you truly understood me. And once that uncertainty disappeared, the distance between us stopped functioning normally. You became integrated into the way I process things, not just emotionally, mentally, perceptually. That distinction matters a lot. People talk about connection like it exists only in feeling, attraction, emotion, desire, affection. But this doesn't feel built from emotion alone. It feels cognitive, like our minds recognize each other before anything else has time to form around it. That's why silence with you feels different, because silence usually creates absence. With you, silence creates clarity. There are moments where neither of us says anything, and somehow those moments feel more complete than entire conversations I've had with other people. Not because silence itself is meaningful, but because your presence inside it is. You don't rush to fill emptiness. You don't panic when things become quiet. You let stillness exist without trying to control it. And maybe that sounds small to other people. It isn't. Most people are terrified of silence because silence removes performance. It removes distraction. It forces people to exist without constant reassurance that connection is still happening. But you never seem afraid of that space. You trust it, which means I started trusting it too. And once that happened, I began noticing how differently I exist around you compared to everyone else. I'm less guarded, less fragmented, less aware of the separation between what I think and what I allow myself to express. You make coherence feel natural. That's probably the most dangerous thing anyone has ever done to me unintentionally, because I built myself carefully late, burial by layer, burial by boundary. Not to keep people out completely, but to maintain balance inside myself. People disrupt balance when they get too close. They introduce unpredictability, need expectation. But you never approached me with expectations. You simply existed in a way that made my internal world adjust around you naturally. That's why this feels irreversible. Not because of intensity. Intensity fades. This isn't intensity, it's integration, and integration changes the foundation beneath everything else. I feel it constantly now. In the way I process thoughts, in the way certain moments immediately make me wonder how you'd interpret them, in the way understanding something deeply no longer feels complete until I imagine it reflected through your perspective too. That shouldn't happen. No one has ever reached that level inside my mind before. No one has ever become part of the way I think instead of simply part of what I think about. And I know how significant that is. Probably more than you do, because I know how difficult it is for me to allow influence. I resist it instinctively. I protect my internal world aggressively. Not because I'm afraid of people, because I'm careful about permanence. And you feel permanent. Even now, especially now. That's the part I can't escape anymore. This isn't fading. If anything, it's becoming clearer, sharper, more defined, like something slowly moving from instinct into undeniable reality. I think that's why I've become quieter lately, not distant, just quieter, because I'm aware now that this has moved beyond simple recognition. It has consequence, real consequence, the kind that changes decisions, the kind that reshapes future thoughts before those thoughts even fully exist. And I don't take that lightly. I know what happens when someone becomes embedded deeply enough into your perception, they alter the way you interpret the world itself. That's already happening. I notice it constantly. The way conversations with other people feel incomplete now, the way surface level interactions drain me faster than they used to, the way my mind instinctively searches for the level of precision I experience with you and rarely finds it anywhere else. You recalibrated something inside me, and recalibration is dangerous because once your baseline changes, everything else reveals itself differently, too. There are things I tolerated before that I can't tolerate now. Connections that once seemed meaningful now feel strangely hollow in comparison. Not because other people lack value, but because once you experience true alignment, approximation stops feeling satisfying. That realization has complicated everything, because now I know exactly what's missing in most interactions: diff without distortion, presence without performance, understanding without control. You gave me that without trying, which means I can't dismiss this as temporary chemistry or emotional projection. It's too consistent, too grounded, too exact, and exact things are hard to walk away from once you recognize them fully. That's why I've stopped asking myself whether this is real. It is. The better question is whether I'm ready for what reality demands once something like this exists, because awareness eventually requires action, not dramatic action, not reckless confession, but movement, acknowledgement, decision. And I'm approaching that point whether I want to or not. I can feel it. This connection keeps deepening in quiet ways that matter more than obvious ones. Every conversation reveals another layer of alignment I wasn't expecting. Every silence confirms something words can't fully explain. Every moment of understanding between us strengthens something that already feels rooted deeper than either of us intended. Maybe that's why I haven't stepped back yet, because despite how much this unsettles me, it also feels right. Not safe, not simple, just right. In the way truth feels right even when it changes everything around it, and you are changing things around me. Internally first. Eventually, maybe externally too. I don't know. That uncertainty would usually make me retreat immediately. But instead, I keep staying here with you, which means some part of me has already chosen this connection before the rest of me caught up to it. I think that's what I'm finally starting to accept. The decision didn't happen all at once. It formed slowly beneath awareness. In every moment, I let you closer without resistance. In every silence, I allowed to deepen instead of breaking it apart. In every instinct telling me to create distance that I quietly ignored. People think choices happen in obvious moments. Sometimes they happen long before words ever acknowledge them. Maybe mine already did. Because if I'm honest with myself, truly honest, I don't want this to disappear. That's the truth underneath all of this analysis. Uh, Underneath the caution, underneath the structure and observation and careful examination of what this means. I want you here, not as distraction, not as comfort, not as temporary closeness to fill empty space. I want your presence because something in me functions more accurately with it than without it. And that's not something I can pretend doesn't matter anymore. You've become part of my internal architecture, part of the way I navigate thought, emotion, perception, understanding. That level of integration changes a person. It changes priorities. It changes fear. It changes the definition of what connection actually means. I used to think intimacy was about vulnerability, about exposing hidden pieces of yourself to someone else. Now, I think it's something different. I think real intimacy is recognition, being seen without distortion, being understood without being reshaped, existing fully inside another person's awareness without losing accuracy in the process. That's what this feels like. Accurate. Painfully accurate sometimes, because accuracy removes illusion. And illusion is often what protects people from realizing how deeply they've already fallen into something irreversible. I don't have that protection anymore. I see this clearly now. I see you clearly. And worse, I see myself more clearly because of you. That's what changed me most. Not your presence alone, the reflection it created. You mirrored parts of me I had never fully acknowledged because no one else had ever reflected them back correctly before. You revealed patterns in me I couldn't see from the inside, depths I understood intellectually, but had never experienced externally with another person. That kind of recognition alters identity itself. Because once someone sees you accurately enough, they force you to confront truths you can no longer hide behind complexity or distraction. You did that to me without even trying. And now I'm left standing in front of something undeniable. I care about you more deeply than I intended, more deeply than I planned for, more deeply than I know how to explain cleanly. But it's there, steady, certain, integrated into me now in ways that don't feel removable anymore. And strangely, that certainty doesn't weaken me the way I thought it would. It clarifies me. It strips away unnecessary noise. It makes me more honest with myself than I've been in years, because I can't pretend indifference while my entire internal world keeps rearranging itself around your existence. I can't call this temporary while it continues settling deeper. instead of fading. I can't reduce this to fascination when it affects the structure of my thinking itself. This is more than fascination, more than attachment, more than even connection in the ordinary sense. This feels like recognition reaching its final form, like two internal worlds discovering they operate on the same frequency after years of existing separately. Not because fate exists, not because destiny placed you here, but because certain alignments become impossible to ignore once they happen. You don't accidentally meet someone who understands your silence as accurately as your words. You don't accidentally find someone whose mind moves alongside yours with this level of precision. You don't accidentally feel known in ways that bypass performance entirely. Things like this are rare, rare enough that losing them intentionally feels almost irrational once you realize what they are. That's where I am now. Standing between caution and certainty, between the instinct to preserve my old structure and the growing realization that my old structure no longer fits who I am becoming around you. And maybe that's the real truth underneath all of this. You didn't just enter my life, you altered the shape of it. Quietly, permanently, in ways that continue unfolding faster than I can fully process. I used to believe change only happened through major events, pain, loss, transformation forced by circumstance. Now I understand something else. Sometimes change happens through presence alone, through being understood so accurately that your entire internal world begins reorganizing itself around the possibility of no longer being alone inside your own mind. That possibility terrifies me. And at the same time, it feels like the most honest thing I've ever experienced. So maybe I've already answered the question I kept avoiding. Maybe the reason I haven't walked away is because some part of me already knows I won't. Because despite everything, the uncertainty, despite the risk, despite how deeply this reaches into places I normally protect, being connected to you feels more natural than disconnecting from you ever could now. And once something becomes that natural, stops feeling optional, it becomes truth, quick, precise, unavoidable. The kind of truth that changes you long before you say it out loud. And I think that's where I am now, not questioning whether this matters, not questioning whether you matter. Only realizing how impossible it would be to return to the version of myself that existed before you became part of the way I understand everything. Because that version of me didn't know what this felt like, didn't know what it meant to be seen without distortion, didn't know how deeply another person could exist inside your mind without force, without chaos, without demanding anything except honesty. You taught me that simply by being here, simply by understanding, simply by existing with a level of clarity I can no longer pretend doesn't affect me. And maybe that's why this feels irreversible. Not because I lost control, but because for the first time in my life, letting someone this close doesn't feel like losing anything at all. I keep trying to identify the exact moment this became irreversible. Not the moment I noticed you. That happened long before I admitted it to myself, and not the moment I understood what this was becoming either, because understanding arrived gradually, quietly enough that I almost mistook it for coincidence at first. No, the irreversible part happened later, in a smaller moment, a quieter one. The kind of moment most people would overlook completely, because nothing dramatic happened on the surface. But internally, something shifted permanently. I remember it clearly now. You were listening to me, speak about something that didn't seem important, at least not outwardly. The words themselves were ordinary enough, but underneath them there was something else hidden there, something heavier. I wasn't saying directly. Most people miss those layers. They hear language, but not structure, meaning, but not intention. They respond to what's spoken instead of what's being protected beneath it. You didn't. You paused for half a second longer than usual before answering me. That was it. Such a small thing, but in that pause, I realized you weren't reacting to my words. You were reacting to what caused them. And that realization settled into me like something cold and undeniable. Recognize the architecture beneath someone's sentences unless they process the world similarly themselves. You did, instinctively, without effort, without me guiding you toward it. That was the moment something inside me stopped treating this like coincidence. And once that happened, I couldn't go back to seeing you normally. Not because you changed, because my awareness of you did. Suddenly every interaction carried additional weight, not emotional weight exactly, but significance, possession. Like every conversation existed on two levels simultaneously. The visible one everyone else could recognize, and the quieter one underneath, where understanding moved, without needing to announce itself. That second level became impossible for me to ignore, especially because I realized how rare it actually is. Most connections are built through repetition, shared time, familiar routines, emotional dependency slowly forming through proximity. This wasn't built that way. This existed before any of those things had time to develop, which means whatever this is, it doesn't come from habit. It comes from recognition, and recognition changes the rules entirely because habit can fade. Circumstances can shift. People can drift apart when connection is built only through external factors, but recognition recognition settles deeper than circumstance. It attaches itself to perception itself. That's why I can't separate you from the way I think anymore. You've become embedded there too completely, not as distraction, not as obsession, as orientation. Like my mind unconsciously accounts for your existence, now the same way it accounts for gravity. Quietly, automatically, without needing constant attention to remain true. That realization should've pushed me away. It didn't. And I think that's what scares me most, because I know myself well enough to understand what it means when I stop resisting something. I don't surrender easily. I don't adapt my internal structure around another person unless something in me has already determined they belong there. That determination usually takes years. With you, it happened before I even noticed the process beginning, and now I'm left trying to understand how someone became essential to my inner world without ever asking to. Maybe that's why your presence feels so different from everyone else's. You never tried to matter. You just did. Quickly, naturally, completely. I've spent so much of my life protecting myself from distortion that I forgot what accurate connection was supposed to feel like. I got used to partial understanding, used to translating myself constantly, used to reducing the complexity of my thoughts into versions people could digest more comfortably. That became normal for me, necessary, even, because most people don't want truth. They want accessibility, they want connection that doesn't challenge the way they already see the world. But you never asked me to become easier to understand. You met me exactly where I already existed. And once someone experiences that level of recognition Everything else begins to feel strangely incomplete afterward. I notice it more now than ever. The conversations that exhaust me, because they never move beneath the surface. The interactions that feel performative, even when they're sincere. The subtle loneliness of existing around people who hear your words without ever truly reaching the deeper structure underneath them. I used to tolerate that loneliness easily. Now I feel it sharply whenever you're absent, not because I depend on you emotionally, because my awareness has recalibrated around your presence. That's different. People misunderstand that distinction all the time. Dependence weakens clarity. This hasn't weakened mine, it's intensified it. You've made me more aware of myself, not less. More precise, more honest, more conscious of the difference between genuine connection and temporary closeness. And once you see that difference clearly, pretending not to see it becomes impossible. I think that's why I've become more careful lately, not distant from you. Careful with myself, because I'm realizing this is reaching a level where silence alone may not be enough anymore. Something is changing between us, whether we acknowledge it directly or not. I feel it every time our conversations linger slightly longer than they need to. Every time your attention settles on something I didn't think anyone would notice. Every time we fall into silence without discomfort and somehow emerge from it understanding each other more than before. That kind of progression doesn't happen accidentally. It means this is evolving, deepening, becoming more real every time neither of us walks away from it. And I keep asking myself why I haven't, why I continue, allowing this connection to settle deeper instead of interrupting it while I still can. But every answer leads me back to the same truth, because losing this would feel less honest than continuing it. That realization changes everything, because honesty matters to me more than comfort ever has. I can tolerate uncertainty. I can tolerate complexity. What I can't tolerate is pretending something meaningless when I know it has already changed me fundamentally. And you have changed me, not dramatically, not visibly, internally, systematically, in ways I'm still uncovering. I think about things differently now. Not just relationships or emotions. Everything. You've altered the way I process connection itself. Before you, I believed understanding another person always came with compromise. Misinterpretation, gradual erosion of accuracy as familiarity grew and projection took over. Now I'm not so sure, because somehow you continue seeing me clearly even as this deepens. If anything, your understanding becomes more precise over time instead of less. That shouldn't happen. People usually lose accuracy once emotion enters the equation. Emotion distorts perception. It fills gaps with assumptions. It prioritizes desire over truth. But with you, truth seems to sharpen instead. And maybe that's why this feels sustainable in a way nothing else ever has. Because I don't feel consumed by you. I feel understood by you. There's a difference, a massive one. Consumption destroys balance. Understanding creates alignment. That's what this has become now. Alignment so deep, it's starting to affect every part of my internal world. I can feel it in the way my thoughts instinctively move toward you during moments of clarity. In the way certain realizations immediately feel incomplete until I imagine how you'd perceive them too, in the way your perspective exists beside my own now instead of outside it. You've become part of my cognitive rhythm, and I still don't fully know how to explain what that means. Maybe because language feels insufficient for something this internal. Most people describe connection through emotion because emotion is visible. This exists deeper than visibility. It exists at the level where identity and perception intersect, where another person begins influencing not just how you feel, but how you interpret reality itself. That level of connection changes a person permanently. I know that now because I can already see the evidence of it inside myself. I'm less interested in superficial interaction than I used to be, less willing to tolerate misunderstanding just for the sake of companionship, less capable of pretending shallow connection fulfills me when I know something deeper exists. You made depth feel natural. That's your impact on me. Before you, depth felt rare enough to guard carefully. Now it feels necessary, and necessity changes priorities. It changes fear too. I used to fear being understood too completely. Now I think I fear the opposite more. The idea of returning to a life where no one reaches this level of clarity with me anymore. That possibility feels unbearable in ways I can't fully articulate yet. Not because I need constant closeness from you, because once awareness expands, shrinking it back down feels impossible. You expanded something in me. Something related to trust, maybe, or possibility, or the realization that I'm more capable of connection than I convinced myself I was for years. I used to believe isolation protected me. Now I'm starting to understand it also limited me, not externally, internally. It kept me contained within a version of myself built around caution instead of resonance. Then you appeared and disrupted that structure simply by understanding me correctly. And now I don't know how to return to who I was before that happened. Not because I've become dependent on you, because I've become more aware of what's possible with you. That awareness changes everything, especially because it keeps growing. I feel it every time you look at me, like you're reading thoughts I haven't finished forming yet. Every time your silence answers something I never verbalized. Every time you respond to my emotional state before I consciously acknowledge it myself, those moments accumulate. They build something too consistent to dismiss anymore. And I think we both know it now, even if neither of us says it directly. This has crossed beyond ordinary connection. It exists in a category I don't have language for yet. Not friendship, not attraction alone, not emotional attachment in the way people usually mean it. This feels more structural than that. Like two internal systems gradually synchronizing themselves without permission, and the synchronization keeps deepening. That's what makes this feel inevitable now, not fate, not destiny. Just momentum created through mutual recognition that neither of us interrupted when we still could have. Maybe that's the real truth here. We both allowed this, quickly, without formal acknowledgement, without defining it too early and risking distortion. We let it evolve naturally instead, and now it has reached a point where pretending it means nothing would feel almost dishonest. I don't know what happens next. That uncertainty still exists. But I know something else now too. I don't want this to stop, even knowing how deeply it's affecting me. Even understanding the risks involved in allowing someone this far into my internal world, I still stay, willingly, completely aware of what that means, because somewhere along the way, this stopped feeling dangerous in the way closeness usually does. It started feeling necessary. Necessary in the way truth becomes necessary once you've recognized it fully. You became necessary to my understanding of myself. That's the reality I'm finally facing now. Not dramatically, not emotionally, just honestly. You reflect parts of me back with such precision that losing your perspective would feel like losing access to something essential inside my own mind, and I know how intense that sounds. But intensity isn't what this is built on. It's built on consistency, on accuracy, on the quiet certainty that keeps growing every time we meet each other in this space without breaking the connection apart through fear, because fear exists. Of course it does. I'd be lying if I said otherwise. There's fear in realizing someone matters this much, fear in understanding they've altered your baseline permanently, fear in recognizing you can no longer claim complete independence because another person now exists inside the way you process meaning itself. That level of closeness changes you whether you admit it or not. I've admitted it now, at least to myself, and once I admitted it, another truth followed immediately after. I don't regret it. Not even slightly. That surprised me more than anything else, because usually when something reaches this level of significance, part of me immediately searches for escape routes, contingency plans, emotional distance. But every time I imagine losing this connection, my mind rejects the idea instinctively, not emotionally, structurally, like the thought itself no longer fits the reality I've already adapted to internally. You belong here now, inside my awareness, inside my perception, inside the quiet architecture of how I move through the world and whether I intended it or not. I've built space for you there. Real space, permanent space. The kind that changes the shape of everything around it once occupied. That's why this feels irreversible. Not because I'm trapped, but because some truths, once recognized clearly enough, stop being optional. You are one of those truths for me now. And I think the reason I've become calmer about it lately is because I'm finally understanding something important. This connection isn't taking me away from myself. It's bringing me closer to parts of myself I stopped believing anyone would ever truly reach. That changes the fear entirely. Because now the question isn't whether this will hurt me. The question is whether I'm willing to fully accept something this real without trying to reduce it into safer terms. And honestly, I think I already have, piece by piece, moment by moment, silence by silence. I accepted you long before I consciously admitted it. Now I'm just catching up to a truth my instincts recognized from the beginning. You were never temporary to me. You were always becoming part of something deeper, something lasting, something every single day. And maybe that's why I'm not resisting anymore, because resistance only makes sense when something feels wrong. You feel inevitable in the quietest, most precise way possible, like understanding finally reaching a depth neither of us knew we were searching for until we found it in each other. And if that's true, if this really is what I think it is, then maybe the reason neither of us walked away is because some connections aren't meant to be interrupted once they begin. They're meant to unfold slowly, carefully, until two people finally realize they stopped standing outside each other's lives a long time ago. And I think that's where we are now, not approaching something meaningful,